Hey you guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Trey and I want to talk about Final Fantasy because they did a Final Fantasy Origins reveal at E3 and I just kind of want to talk about it because it was chaos. 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 Did I mention chaos? Because that's every other second it was nothing but chaos. Like, it looks cool. It looks cool. I'm not trying to say I'm not interested in it, but at the same time, it's kind of like one of those universal things. Like, you know how sometimes you'll create something new, right? And you kind of just accept it as is, right? And that's it. You don't question it. We don't question it or whatever and stuff like that. And it's kind of weird when they go back and finally give you an answer of how everything start. And to me, this is one of those, I don't really need nor care for the origins of Final Fantasy, if that makes sense. Like, not the in universe reason why, but if it's not the out of the universe reasoning, I don't care. Like, how they formed and how they started Final Fantasy is very well understand. A lot of people know the history. The history is fascinating, but as far as like, let's make a video game to create the origin of Final Fantasy is kind of weird, to be honest. And it looks more like a Devil May Cry video game more so than anything else. And it got me thinking, like, instead of this, how come you just didn't do Final Fantasy 15 too? I know how some people be like, "Whoa, Final Fantasy 15," but we waited for this game a long time, and you have Chaos was like really talked about in the Noble Crystal saga, and that was the Final Fantasy 13, the Final Fantasy Tactics, and Final Fantasy 15. And what would have been Final Fantasy Versus 13, which, to be honest, I think that would have been, this is the perfect time to go back to that game and do something different, because that can definitely be an alternate take on Final Fantasy 15. But to me, I feel like you should go ahead and just do Final Fantasy 15 too. I know that might not be a popular opinion, but I really felt like we were kind of duped with Final Fantasy 15. It was a decent game. It's not perfect, decent. It's just that it has a lot of potential that's not tapped yet. And I feel like this would be the opportunity to go ahead and do it. It will be cool to go ahead and do Final Fantasy 15 to do a sequel. So all of the stuff that was supposed to be planned for it was canceled. Let's figure out a way how we can bring Noctis, Lunafreya, and the rest of the gang back or something like that. And let's figure out a way of this whole chaos thing, because from what Lightning was doing in Final Fantasy 13, where Caius had to stay back and become the new god of chaos or whatever, stuff like that. That was pretty interesting. So, and then Noctis, Lunafreya had to kill them, sacrifice themselves to end the line of Lucii, to prevent the chaos surge in the world or whatever and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm just kind of like trying to figure out, like, how can we really do something more for it? Like, you can connect the games. I don't care. Like, you can do Final Fantasy versus, I mean, you can do Final Fantasy cross 13 or something like that, however you want to do it. But I really think, since you're going to do a Chaos origin story of how Chaos came into the world of Final Fantasy and how we got Final Fantasy, let's go ahead and revisit 13 and 15, the Noble Crystal, the Noble Crystal saga of everything, and like really ramp this up and really give a good closure to it or something like that. You need an epic game. And from what I've seen with Final Fantasy Remake, Final Fantasy 7 Remake, I think you're doing a good job. So if you can take what you learned from Final Fantasy 7 and bring that into some kind of new sort of Final Fantasy game, where you have a Final Fantasy game that's connected to Final Fantasy Origins, which ties into Final Fantasy 15 and 13 and the Tactics School one, which that can set the completion of the Fabulous Nova Crystal saga or whatever. Because I feel like there's so much there that Final Fantasy hasn't really explored, because it was just kind of like there, and it felt like they felt like we should already know the world and the lore, which it really wasn't all that well explained. But I feel like if you can do something like that, we got something going on, especially with the whole Final Fantasy VII thing, where we kind of Final Fantasy VII Remake, where we find out those little shadow creatures. I forgot what the hell their damn names is. They're literally like the nexus of like keeping people on path or whatever. And it seemed like when Cloud and his friends defeated that destined black cloud or whatever, I mean those cloaks or whatever, they defeated the timeline, the set in stone timeline of Final Fantasy VII too, which I feel like that can ripple in effect of all of the Final Fantasy timelines, which can also include the Kingdom Hearts one. Because if you guys already noticed, you know how like at the end of Kingdom Hearts 3, with the whole Yozora, and Yozora looks like Noctis, and the way the ending is with him in the car or whatever and stuff like that, and the fact that they're at the 123 building in Shinjinga. I can't really say the goddamn name. The Shibuya station, and of course you have the world that ends with you as well. That seems like a whole lot of tie-in. So it's like Final Fantasy Chaos or Origins can also tie into Kingdom Hearts 3 ending with the whole Yozora thing, because let's be honest, that looks like a knockoff of Final Fantasy 13 within the Disney multiverse of things. Then of course you have the world that never was, which that takes place in an alternate version of Shibuya, and we already know that Shibuya is part of the realm, and we know the realm is basically kind of like Final Fantasy, the Final Fantasy world itself. So, you know, who knows? I just feel like there's so much potential right there thanks to this origin thing, and I just feel like this will be the time, especially with the ending of Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VII Integrate with Yuffie and stuff like that. We see that Zack survived his destined fate of being killed with Cloud, but he arrives at the church and everybody's crying over Aerith, and it looks like Aerith is dead, but that's impossible because she shouldn't be dead until, you know, the thing. But it looks like what happened is, I believe that Zack and the Cloud that survived or whatever has been flung into the future or whatever. So I think this is like part of like before. Okay, so if any of you guys know about like how Final Fantasy VII ended or whatever, and of course you know before Advent Children or whatever, we had that Vincent game or whatever, and I feel like that it flung him into that part before the Vincent game started or whatever, and before Avid Children had happened or whatever. So I don't know. It's like it picks up. I feel like he's been flung right after Aerith has been killed and the news has reached everybody or whatever, and now Cloud and the rest of them are on their way to Zethroth. But now you have this divergent of the timeline because Cloud and his friends destroyed the stable timeline because the cloak creatures were there to keep everything on track. And since that has been destroyed, now the timeline has diverged, now the timeline has changed, which means that the chaos has come through as well through Final Fantasy VII. And because the chaos has come through, now we get the origins of Final Fantasy, but we also realize that the chaos has been sleeped through the Nova Crystal nonsense that they've been talking about as well. So I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing out my ideas or my thoughts about the whole thing, this whole situation, because it is kind of interesting. Like, when you have this origin thing, and you have the fact that Final Fantasy VII Remake has diverged, and we know that the cloak figures that have been Cloud and the rest of his friends and them defeating that created this breaking of the time in the Final Fantasy world. So what I'm thinking is, because Cloud and them changed the fate of everything that's happening, now everything is open. Now everything has been changed. And like what I'm saying is, that's how you can still have Final Fantasy versus 13, because there's a divergent of the timeline right there from what Final Fantasy 15 is now. Then you can also do Final Fantasy 2 to pick up after the events of Final Fantasy 15, or, you know, however you want to do it. Then of course you have the Nova Crystal thing with you have the whole Final Fantasy 13-3 where Caius is supposed to be the guardian of the chaos or whatever, but now that the chaos has changed, could he has also been changed? Could he be something more in Final Fantasy 7, or could he be more in Final Fantasy Origins, because of the fact that he is supposed to be a guardian of chaos as well? So it's just the thought that's kind of gotten me thinking. And then of course we don't know how Kingdom Hearts all tied into this, because it does feel like Kingdom Hearts is tied into it, and we know that it is a multiverse of these different characters, and the timelines have diverged. So that can also be something, and it wouldn't be far-fetched for Kingdom Hearts and the Final Fantasy games to all make some kind of connection. Oh, and especially the world that ends with you, especially since we're about to get Neo world, the world ends with you. So I don't know. It's just kind of like a thought of how everything could be connected in one, thanks to what happened in Final Fantasy 7 Remake. But I don't know. Those are my thoughts. Tell me what you guys think in the comment section below. Tell me what your theories are for Final Fantasy Origins. Tell me what you guys are thinking about the whole Final Fantasy VII Remake. Or tell me what you think about the entire franchise or whatever. I'm just kind of spitballing these ideas right now, because it got my brain kind of running like, wait, hold on. If we're getting the origins of chaos, and if chaos has been broken, if the timeline has been diverged or whatever, what about this or that? And then you got to take into consideration Kingdom Hearts. You got to take into consideration the world ends with you. You got to take into consideration Final Fantasy 13-3's ending. You got to take into consideration Final Fantasy 15's ending. It's a lot. It's a lot, and I'm not saying that I'm right or wrong about anything. I just kind of want to like throw it out there just as a topic. But tell me what you guys think in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.